Hello friends and welcome back. This is video number 2 out of my series on the digital trap. And in last episode we ended up with these two CD players, and I wanted to sort of say a bit more about the DACs in these, and also this episode number 2 will go how my trap went further and also how it led to me building tube amps and which was purely due to the digital trap. And then yes, so that is what you can expect here. So first of all, these two players. So a lot of people, probably less so the people that watch my videos, but have the impression that technology proceeds at a steady pace and it gets better and better and better. Even though if you listen to people like Peter Kortrup, they'll say that usually the best technology was invented first, and then the progression is a lot about how to make it cheaper, and that comes in bumps. So it gets cheaper, 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 and then somebody actually finally decides to make it better, and then it gets cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. So, which was of course with CD players very much the case. The first ones were very expensive. Now, this also went for the DAC chips. So I read from somebody who works in industries that he said, like, you have to realize that these first CD players, and this goes for the DACs in both these players, that they were cost no object DACs, and that means they almost applied discrete technologies into a chip, but it had all the integration, the temperature variations of an integrated circuit. But they used different technologies. For example, this Analog Devices 1862 used CMOS, it used MOS, it used bipolar switches, just like the TDA 15441A. So they used all the best technologies in their first chips. They were really cost no object DACs. And of course, once the medium caught on, they looked at producing cheaper players and more affordable players. And this is the stage when you could buy your $5 CDs in a shop, or your very cheap CDs that were packed full to the brim with the tracks. And then that was only possible together with very cheap chips that compromised the quality. But these were cost no object DACs. And so while I had a good start in DACs, you'll see later on in this video, it went down and down and down, and it's continued to go down for a long time. But people often don't recognize the fact that these were cost no object DAC designs. They were the best in the best, and some will claim they're still the best and the proper way to do things. Even though the modern Delta Sigma chips seem to approach this level, but there's plenty of people that think they have never really done that, only on paper. So that is a point of probably contention, but you have to sort of see that this starting point was fairly unique. This is not, and these two players are very good representative of that. And people that mod these and then get really the best out of these chips will probably can attest to them, and they wouldn't switch them for newer DACs. So, however, I had a bit of a break in here. My story splits here because back then I moved from the Netherlands to Australia and I had to reconstitute my system. I didn't take it with me. And some of my choices I'll go into. So one of the things I did, I went with a brand, secondhand, with a brand called Ambience loudspeakers. I don't think they're no longer in production, but this was a very good value brand. So this is a magnetostat, so it has a long ribbon in here. It's like a 1.60 meter high loudspeaker, and it has an up-firing woofer in here. It's a bass reflex, and by putting this upwards, it prevents a lot of. It blends really well with the ribbon. It's a very good invention to have this as an up-firing woofer, and I found the integration even better than some of the Martin Logans, strangely enough. So not entirely comparable, and they were very cheap for what they were, and beautifully made as well. They had nice Australian hardwood on the sides and so on. So that was one. I married it up with a 25 watt Class A amplifier, 30 kilo beast, and then the source. And this is where we get in the further trappings of digital. I went with an SACD player. So I thought, you know what, 24 bits, double the sampling rate, or more than double, 96 kilohertz sampling rate. This will make a really good system. And then I started experimenting also with getting an SACD and then comparing to the normal CD. And I actually found there was no difference. I mean, all the differences were just superficial. There was really, in overall experience, nothing. And now was the rest of my system the limit? I don't think so, because later on, as I switched other DACs and so on, of course my system was really able to resolve those. Now these were not as resolving as the quads probably, but pretty good. And a very good transition if you're ever needing to go for a quad and you want a bit more low end. This was a very good transition, so I enjoyed those speakers. So then, after this, and so this is one of these trappings again, like all the specs seem to have gone up. Like this accepts 24 bits data and it will accept higher things, but it actually doesn't mean, and probably I will go into it in part 3, it actually doesn't mean that it actually gets to the output. None of the DACs at this time actually had 24 bits accurate output. They're far more limited by signal to noise and so on before you hit the 24 bits. There has no chance of actually even making it out. But that is something probably for part 3 of this video series. So then I went to this DAC and this was a brief moment where I regained my sanity. And what I did is I recognized that I was unsatisfied with the audio, so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna get the DAC. Back then I also had, of course, a lot of digital music and downloaded music and ripped music from my CD collection. And I knew I wanted something more musical, and I knew that my previous CD players had been much better. And so I had to look for reviews of DACs that had some words to that effect, that recognized it, and I made the right purchase with this. And this DAC, even though it's a Delta Sigma DAC, so it has a Burr Brown PCM 1792 in it, that was a little bit more musical DAC than on average, I would say. And I tried some different. I also tried some Cambridge audio and so on, but it didn't impress me. And then, but this DAC was good. And even later, when I upgraded to a much better spec DAC with modern technology, in this case, for example, this RME DAC, which got really great reviews. Some people even went off their NOS non-oversampling DACs to this DAC, and I thought, well, that must be good then. And yes, it lifted the veil, and it's a very good, and it had a very handy equalizer, so you could actually, and by this stage I got into headphones, but more on that later. But even though I recognized it, and even when I later sold this one, I knew I missed something of the musical aspect, but by then I thought I could have gained it from other methods, the musicality, and it wasn't to be. But I was a bit of a turning point. So this DAC was actually quite musical, however technically not that proficient, and I don't think those two are correlated. I think it just had to do with the fact that there was, well, the box was about this size as you see it from over here, so it was about this size, like, you know, 80 centimeters wide, 15 centimeters deep or something, this high. That was a nice DAC. And then I thought, because I was quite unsatisfied, and I also knew I couldn't deal with the acoustics of the apartment that we were in back then, weren't also that great. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go the headphone route and then go with a high quality DAC, and that should bring me the solution. Of course it wasn't, but that's what I thought. And so this was part of that, and had a headphone out, which is nice if you take it to work. However, back then I heard that headphone amps could make a huge difference, and also with this unit, if you hooked up an external headphone amp, it would be much better. And I tried a lot. But one of the things that was a bit of a breakthrough for me is when I engaged a local amp builder here in Sydney, in Australia. So that maker, he sells his amps under the name of McChanson, and a very nice man, and he builds sort of old school type of amp designs, and very cost effective. He sold us them really well. They're well made. However, they're also a bit old school, so they also often, not all of their models, but often it ticks the old boxes, like a bit slow, a bit warm, and so on. And but you know, classic design, tube rectifier. These are 7 EM10s, output transformer, choke for the filtering. You know, classic unit, and this improved the sound a lot, and I really like the sound of this with my headphones. So that combination, it got me, it taught me that yes, the headphone amp makes a huge difference for headphones, and it is a must-have. And I also thought, and because of what it added to the sound, I also thought, yeah, that is the direction in which it can become more musical. And it wasn't perfect, and so I got a bit of an argy-bargy with this maker, and I thought, you know, can't you improve that? Can't you improve that? But in the end, yes, he could work with extra components that you would maybe bring to him, but he would still charge the full price, and of course he had to then integrate it into his design. So I understand that he wasn't so hot about that idea, nor me as a novice sort of commenting on his 30 years of amp building experience, or 40 years. So that actually then got me into the idea of maybe doing the amp design myself and building something myself and improving on this design to actually get to that sound that I vaguely remember from my first system setup. And now, one of the things I also compared was this, a very high quality, very well spec'd 6-watt headphone amp from Violectric. Very nicely done, but in some ways it couldn't compete with this amp, which was a third or maybe of the price of this amp. Very expensive headphone amp. Still, I recognized the advantages, but the tube just did something with the sound that this couldn't even bring. So that really got me, that altogether got me into building better amp designs. And so I was still, with a brief blip of sanity from this DAC, which by the way is the only a little bit musical Delta Sigma DAC that I owned, but that aside, I started building all kinds of circuits with amp design. So this is how my 5, 6, 7 years ago or so I started doing this, and I started to try all kinds of the designs. I also went through 25 different headphones. So in this picture you can see a ZMF headphone, very nicely made. You can see some other Hi-Fi-Man HG6, Verum headphones, HG600, and this is one of my first finished models where I put it in a nice case, based on this. I think this was the 6E6P tube. Very simple amp, very nice. I actually, this unit went to a friend of mine. This is a combination of this. It's a very good value combination, very good sound, and because of those Verums, they sound a little bit like normal loudspeakers, so it has a very natural, it's a very good combination and a very good sound. Here you can see one of my other experiments with using 4 single-ended, so rather than using push-pull class A transformers, I used 4 single-ended transformers, and to see what that does. Yes, lots of experiments. However, I was still completely trapped in believing that I could get more out of the thing. And you can, however, something unsatisfying in that I was still fully immersed in the digital trap, thinking that I had the latest and the greatest. And of course, there's much more expensive DACs but I expected something at least to be on the level of my first CD players, and it simply wasn't there. So, and what did it take to get me out of it? It was really this, a record player. This is really what sort of put me in touch with, okay, I am trapped, and this was sort of the turnaround, and and this was not exactly I got a cheaper model, but it just told me already that I was still trapped there in the digital, and now I'm still going to work with digital because as you can see here, and I've got another CD player coming. I'm actually working with some of the CD players, and we'll get into that in part 3. What I'm doing with these and what the plans are, but this tells you the setup story, why I got into tube and belting, how I got into a deep trap through A/B comparisons and being deluded by specs and by the illusion of progression. But I got completely trapped, and it had its upside because I would have never gotten into this without it, but that's the story so far. So I hope you got something out of that. In part 3 we'll look at a little bit more at some probably some technology. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do, but we'll look at some of the solution looking forward, and we're going to also look in some of the technical aspects of DACs. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode number 2 out of my digital trap series, and I'll thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you in part 3 or another video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, put it in the comments and I'll get back to you, or you have some similar experience, let me know. And otherwise I hope to catch you in another video, and other than that, have a brilliant day, have a brilliant week, and see you the next time. Bye bye.